another review video. In this one, we're going to be talking about hedonism. So, just to begin, the hedonistic theory of value, this should seem familiar, but that just goes, pleasure is the only intrinsic good, and pain is the only intrinsic bad. So, when we ask the hedonist, this is a theory of the good life. So, to answer the question, what is the good life? The hedonist would answer, the best life, or the good life, is a life of maximal net pleasure. To get net pleasure, it is the total pleasure experienced minus the total pain. So it's kind of like a calculation. You don't need to think of it numerically. Some hedonists have. We don't really talk about that much in this class, but what's really important is it's total pleasure minus amount of pain. Pain is like negative pleasure points. And you want what gives you the best of any of the lives you could have lived, of any of your options, the highest net pleasure in those circumstances for you. So there are two ways of being a hedonist. The first one we've kind of been calling the dumb hedonist. That is the profligate hedonist, or the hedonist that lives a profligate lifestyle. When they think about maximizing net pleasure, they just really think about what is the most intense pleasure I can experience right now. What gets you the most intense pleasure, and just repeat that. So tons of sex, tons of drugs, tons of drugs. That's what kept coming up. A lot of drugs involved in the profligate hedonist lifestyle. I mean, when you think about the pleasure you can feel when just really high up a ton of drugs, it's really high up there. I mean, you can really intensify your pleasure by being on hard drugs. Don't do it, obviously, but I mean, that's true. Another thing, gambling, that's a lot of pleasure you can try to maximize in the moment. We've been making a bit of a caricature of the profligate hedonist, but maybe more realistically, just like scrolling through TikTok, you're like, what's just gonna give me like that dopamine rush to my brain? I don't really have to think super difficult or super critically, just like, phone, make me happy right now, scroll through TikTok, scroll through TikTok forever, it never stop. So, those are, maybe do some drugs and scroll on TikTok. That would be another way of being a profligate hedonist. But the smart hedonist, which is a model we're kind of more focused on in class, that's the prudent lifestyle. So the prudent lifestyle begins with sorting pleasures into categories and using sober reasoning. So clear reasoning, being, again, like sober with your thinking instead of impulsive or irrational. So just, we'll discuss this more in a moment, but just some maybe examples of the prudent hedonists. They probably study so they can do well on their test. Getting an A on this exam will make them feel good in the long term, and this is a priority for them, studying. Maintaining basic friendships, they got their homework done, they got all their work done in time, and they have a little bit of extra time to go see a friend, something like that. So those are just a couple examples, but it goes on. So how to sort your desires. This is the Epicurean theory of desire. This is what a hedonist, a smart hedonist, might use to sort their desires into categories. Beginning with the first category is natural desires. These are just desires we develop naturally. This is a broad term, and what's more important is maybe the two categories of natural desires. So both of these are desires we develop naturally, but the first are natural and necessary. So not only are they natural desires and we develop them naturally, but they're necessary for life, health, and happiness. So like food, water, sleep, shelter, some kind of feeling of friendship or community. But there's another category, and that is natural and unnecessary. So you can think of this as the extravagant version of the natural and necessary desires. For your purposes, these two categories matter more than just like natural desires as a category on its own. The fact that one is natural and necessary and one is natural and unnecessary, that's the more important distinction for hedonists, at least. So the extravagant version of food that's basically nourishing is like fancy food. It's unnecessary, but it's natural to want that. if someone was not socialized at all, or they live on a deserted island, they would probably still prefer that their food tastes kind of good as opposed to it tasting awful. They might figure out a way to spice their food, find some kind of spices, so it doesn't taste as bad. It's unnecessary, but it's natural. Same with like a spacious house, regardless of how you're socialized. A spacious house is a natural desire to feel, or an aesthetically pleasing house, a house that you feel like represents you and that you like. So it is a natural desire, but it is unnecessary. And the second category is vain desires. So these are irrational desires we develop only through socialization. So if someone wasn't socialized to believe so, they would not develop these desires. If someone wasn't socialized at all, they would never develop these desires. So a couple examples. One example we talk about is a desire to please the gods. That can only really be developed socially. And in fact, something to note there is that it is maybe impossible to really feel like you're properly pleasing the gods. At this point, the desire to please the gods, that feels like a never-ending demand. You're never really going to feel like, at least a lot of the Greeks at this time didn't really feel like they were pleasing all of the gods that they believed in. They thought they might have been doing something wrong because of the way their crops failed or something of that nature. Another vain desire would be like $1 million to be a millionaire, to be super rich. The desire that, to accumulate a mass sum of money, anything like that. Fame also probably falls into a vain desire. And maybe having $1 million might not be impossible to achieve. However, it's significantly more difficult to achieve. In fact, it's very difficult to achieve, or highly unlikely that many people will achieve it. Fame, also very difficult to achieve fame. So something to note is that as we go down this list from natural and necessary to natural and unnecessary, and then to vain, they become harder, if not eventually impossible, to fulfill at all. So that's one thing that's maybe helpful to note. So what Epicurus says about these desires, so you should sort them into categories and then determine how you should act accordingly, and that involves which ones you should fulfill and how you should fulfill them. For natural and necessary, you should fulfill all of those. I mean, they're necessary. Natural and unnecessary, fulfill very occasionally. Like, indulge every now and then, but again, very occasionally. When you've done this reasoning and you've found that it is beneficial to fulfill those. Vain desires, he wants to eliminate entirely. So, especially if, they're impossible to fulfill, isn't it pretty reasonable that you shouldn't have any desires that are impossible to fulfill? I mean, that'll only make you miserable. So one thing that's stressed, this isn't necessarily on your handout, but we did talk about it in class. Many of these vain desires are based on an irrational belief. And he thinks that with sober reasoning and philosophical reasoning, we can debunk that irrational belief and hopefully get rid of that vain desire, and hopefully thereby eliminating the pain that that vain desire results in. So, I mean, it would be painful for me to really desire $1 million. It's just not realistic. It's maybe not even possible. So if it's only causing me pain, I mean, that might result from the false belief that I'm capable of, result from the false belief that $1 million will be good for me to have, or that I'm capable of getting $1 million at all. So, as kind of an example, a pretty famous example, Epicurus believes that one example of a vain desire that many people hold is the desire to live forever, or the desire to avoid death. And this often causes a lot of anxiety. At least I we'll frequently hear people talk about death anxiety, which is honestly a pretty common thing where people are made, you know, they lay awake at night, or they're made constantly anxious by their fear of death. And again, at least in my experience, I've met a lot of people who seem to deal with this, and it seems to be a fairly common thing to struggle with. So, and that comes from the belief, the irrational belief, Epicurus thinks, that being dead will be bad for me. And if we were to dispel that irrational belief, the belief that being dead will be bad, then hopefully the desire to avoid death goes away. And thereby, the pain that results from the desire to avoid death, or the anxiety that results from it, goes away too. So he uses this argument, this is a philosophical argument, against the claim that being dead will be bad for me. It starts with, something can be bad for me only if I can experience it. So the defense we talk about here is, these are two examples. The first one is about necessarily if something can be good for you if you don't experience it. So say your friends throw a birthday party for you on your birthday. You don't get an invite, you're not aware of it. You have a kind of sucky birthday, just you. You think everyone forgot about you, and then your friend tries to tell you, like, they see you later and they're like, no, we had a great party. We all had a great time, and it was great for you. We threw this party for you. Of course you weren't there. We didn't invite you, but it was great for you. And it seems like no, that party could not have been good for you because you couldn't experience it. You weren't there to experience it at all. And similarly, the Martian earthquake. Say there's a really devastating earthquake on Mars right now. It destroys many things. Maybe there's life on Mars, and it takes away some of that, or a lot of that. Devastating. However, not myself, at least I'm not. I'm not aware of this earthquake. It doesn't affect me at all. I experience no pain because of it. Is that earthquake bad for me? No, it doesn't seem like it. I guess little Timmy is the example we gave in class, is little Timmy, who's not aware of the Martian earthquake and it has no bearings on his life. Was the Martian earthquake bad for him? No, he didn't know about it, he didn't experience any effects, and he couldn't have possibly experienced it at all. So, that is to defend the premise. Something can be bad for you only if I can experience it. The second premise, I can't experience being dead. Defense we offer here is, first premise, I can't experience anything when I don't exist. That seems pretty obviously true. Like, when you cease to exist, it's just like nothing. It's not even like blackness, it's like actually nothing. I won't exist when I'm dead. You've ceased to exist. That's what being dead is. Therefore, I can't experience being dead. Again, this is presupposing there isn't an afterlife. It's not necessarily presupposing atheism, because you could be a theist and just not believe that you of any sort will experience an afterlife. Maybe you could be a theist that doesn't believe in an afterlife at all, or maybe a theist that believes that whatever soul of yours carries on to the afterlife is so different that it's actually not even you anymore. Either way, you're not the one experiencing the afterlife. When you die, you're not experiencing anything. And therefore, you cannot experience being dead. Therefore, being dead will not be bad for me. This is a pretty simple argument. Maybe its simplicity is its downfall. Maybe its simplicity is its strength. You can kind of think a lot about this. I don't explicitly make a note of it, but we did bring up one possible counterexample to NB1, that is the first premise. What if you go your whole life thinking your partner was faithful to you, when in fact, and you die thinking that, very happy, there were no signs of them being them cheating on you whatsoever, and it never negatively affected you. However, it is just not true. It is actually the case that they were horribly unfaithful and they were serially cheating on you. Is that bad for you? I mean, you never experience any consequences of it. You never discover it. It never is there to painfully affect you. Can that still be bad for you? And that's a question I think that the answer, I think, might be kind of torn. I think some people might be like, actually, if you can't experience it at all, then how can it really be bad for you? Maybe you're kind of sold with a lot of the basic things with this argument. It seems right to you. But other people might say, and they wouldn't be wrong to think this, like, actually, something can be bad for you even if you don't experience it. And that's one example. So that's one possible counterexample to the first premise. However, there's another argument against hedonism that we discuss in class, and that is the experience machine argument. So this is an argument against hedonism broadly. The first premise is, if hedonism is true, then it would be good for me to plug into the experience machine. Defense of this is just, it's true. I mean, the hedonist, what they care about is achieving maximal net pleasure, and you actually can achieve maximal net pleasure in the experience machine. I mean, the experience machine lets you program life however you want it, and the pleasure is real. That's something to note. The pleasure and pain is real. Yes, it's pre-planned, it's simulated, and maybe artificial, but the pleasure is still real pleasure. The pain is still real pain that you're experiencing. That's not necessarily the point to get caught up on here. And the truth is, you can achieve maximal net pleasure in the experience machine. I mean, I could program myself to have an incredibly pleasurable life in the experience machine. And honestly, the possibilities with what I could do there, like, by contrast, the possibilities of what I could do by, doing the best I can to maximize pleasure in my actual life, like, seem pretty insignificant. I mean, my pleasure score, the amount of net pleasure that I can achieve without the experience machine is probably going to be significantly lower than the amount of pleasure I can experience with the experience machine. So, if hedonism is true, and that's a definition of the good life, it would be good for you to plug into the experience machine. The second premise is, it would not be good for me to plug into the experience machine. So one thing to go off of is the overwhelming majority of people would not plug into the experience machine, and they think there's something somewhat wrong with it, at least. A defense you could give here, one of probably many defenses for it, the premise, it would not be good for me to plug into the experience machine, is you'll lose many good things in the experience machine, or you'll miss out on them. For example, freedom, you won't be free. You may feel free, you will not be free. Moral virtue, you won't actually be doing any good when you think you are. Knowledge, you have what appears like knowledge, but it's actually not true. You actually believe a ton of falsehoods. You believe that you are, a famous celebrity, and everyone loves you, when in fact that's not true. When in fact you're not a famous celebrity, you're a person plugged into the experience machine. Love, maybe love can't be real in the experience machine, meaning, and so on. So what this seems to indicate is that many of us think that there are other intrinsic goods, not just pleasure. So someone asked a good question. People have tons of different reasons, like I mentioned, for not plugging into the experience machine. Could the betrayal of your family be one of them? And possibly. One thing to think about is, this is an argument against hedonism, and maybe like missing your family, or only having a fake version of your family, when in reality your family is devastated and grieving your loss, basically. One thing to think about from the hedonist perspective, you wouldn't be experiencing that. So they can kind of account for that. They can be like, well, if that's your only reason for saying it's not good to plug into the experience machine, I have another argument for you. And that is to say that something can only be bad for you if you can experience it. And you won't experience the devastation of your family grieving or any of the real consequences of you plugging into it. Therefore, it still would be good for you to plug into the experience machine. So that's one place to be careful. You don't necessarily need to know that for the test. It's just one thing to think about. But these, the hedonist can't really account for. The hedonist is committed to saying that since the only intrinsic good is pleasure, these things aren't intrinsically good, where most of us, as we might actually kind of gain as a lesson from the experience machine thought experiment, is that we do intrinsically value these things like freedom, knowledge of truth, and so on. And of course, the conclusion is therefore hedonism is false. You can think about whether or not this has fully turned you off hedonism, whether or not you still think hedonism has certain points, even if it might have a weakness here. But yeah, those are just some of the things to think about. Again, if you've any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And that's all. Thank you for watching.